make sure everybody's familiar with the Mattress Recycling Council. It's a nonprofit organization that was formed by the mattress industry, and it operates recycling programs in states that have mattress recycling laws or take-back laws. Currently, California, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, however, Oregon has passed its initial law, so the program is not up and running, but will be soon. For consumers, it's known as Bye Bye Mattress. So you may have seen this logo before to help consumers raise awareness about how to properly recycle their mattresses. Each state's program is funded by a recycling fee that's collected when the consumers first buy the mattress or box spring. And nearly 2 million mattresses are recycled annually, which adds up. So we have a lot of years of operation now, and within the efforts of the Mattress Recycling Council, it's quite a broad range. There's the collection, transportation, and recycling of the mattresses themselves. A lot of communications to raise awareness and try to prevent dumping of mattresses. And then there are some special programs like the commercial volumes program. So large volumes of mattresses, say from hospitals or college campuses, can be recycled all at once. And then there's also a wide variety of research about how to make all of those earlier activities more efficient, more effective, and increase recycling. And then finally, there's what we're going to be talking about today, which is SB2, or you can see on the right there, the Sleep Products Sustainability Program. The good news is that over 80% of the mattresses that have reached end of consumer use have been diverted or are being diverted, and MRC is diverting over 52 million pounds of useful materials into their next life as new products. Within a given mattress, within a single mattress, the recycling rate's over 75%. And as I said, it's added up over time. So to date, MRC's recycled over 10 million mattresses. So it's a lot of mattresses out there. Hi, I'm Ryan. I'll be your host today. I am the SB2 Sustainability Consultant. I'm also the principal of Lean Green Way, my consulting firm. And I have a background in waste and corporate sustainability. And you can see my contact info in the bottom right. So I've been mentioning SB2, or the Sleep Product Sustainability Program. And so in case you're not familiar with it, wanted to tell you what it is not. Specifically, it's a certification for manufacturing facility operations. So what goes on within the four walls of a manufacturing plant. It doesn't have anything to do with product, the materials that go into the product or that sort of thing. And it is specifically a system of processes, it's a management system, to promote continuous improvement. So it's not a performance threshold, so you don't have to meet a minimum, say, recycling rate or energy efficiency rate in order to get certified. It's more that you have to demonstrate that you have concrete processes in place to set targets, measure your progress against them, make improvements, figure out when things aren't going right, and then fix them. And it is currently offered at no cost to eligible California-based mattress manufacturers, as long as they're registered as they are required to be by state law. So the benefits of the program is really that it gives verification that a mattress manufacturer has a good sustainability program, and that's by us, a nonprofit, a credible third party. So it's not the manufacturer saying, hey, we're good. It's somebody else saying, we've checked, we've rated them against these 11 criteria, and yes, they're good. It also provides a usable label and a logo for promotion and a whole publicity toolkit. So specifically, I mentioned that you need to have 11 elements of this management system in place. Those elements fall under plan, people, and process, all arranged around improving sustainability. Under plan, you need to have an environmental policy that's your guiding North Star for where you're headed. A facility impact assessment to assess what is your facility's impact on waste generation, energy consumption, and water consumption. And then to set goals and targets to improve them. Measure those goals and targets, make sure they actually are improving and that you're measuring them using industry standards. And then to engage your people to make improvements against those goals and targets. So there's a big focus on employee awareness and engagement to make sure you're engaging the brains of your whole workforce, keeping them up to date, showing them progress, asking for ideas, but then also beyond your four walls that you're partnering with suppliers to engage them to make improvements, because a lot of waste reduction and reuse initiatives require supplier engagement. And then finally, the last part of best practice sharing is to share what you're doing well with others so that they can learn from your progress and repeat your successes and to hold up your facility as a leader. And then finally, you need repeated processes in place to ensure, one, that you're meeting regulatory compliance, kind of the bare minimum, but that you are going through and verifying that your program is working the way you think it should. When it's not, because it won't be perfect, and that's okay. You have a process for tracking corrective and preventative actions. And then finally, making sure that you have a resilience plan for when things go wrong, such as your recycler stops picking up, or you have a compressed air leak and your compressed air system is just bleeding lots of precious electricity in the form of compressed air. So those are the sorts of things. And the certification process ultimately is to make sure that these things are in place, they're functioning, you can show subjective evidence that they're functioning. And if that's the case, then we certify you. These are all in a plan, do, check, act cycle. So the same elements we just looked at, only just organized as, this is your plan, this is your do, then you check to see if it's working and act on what you found. So it is very much based on that Deming cycle, similar to ISO 14001, but much less complicated than ISO 14001. What we found from certified facilities, and I'll get more into lessons learned from those certifications, is that from the time we do an initial training, so we give you an initial training to help you start wherever you're at, and whether you have no sustainability activities, or you have some, or you have a really sophisticated program, that training helps you bridge whatever gap remains to certification. What we found with our certified facilities is after the training, typically takes 4 to 9 months to establish your program, exercise it, to actually work the program and start working your system and gaining that continuous improvement. Fortunately, throughout the process, we provide you with resources to help you and support you throughout the way. We have a guidance document. There are several program templates that are optional. So if you need to do a facility impact assessment, you haven't done that before, we have a form that you can use. If you already have one in place and you want to use yours, that's fine too. So it's a lot of optional resources for you to pull from when you need them. And then finally, there's just Q&A support. So if you need to reach out and say, hey, here's how we did our program verification checklist, could you look at it and see if you have any suggestions for improvement? So that's the level of support we provide. Within the program guidance document, there's some a lot of detail about how to set up each requirement. So it's all there. None of this is blind to go out and figure it out. A lot of these are hosted in a members only resource site. So once you complete the training, you get access to the site and can download the templates, download the guidance, and access all of this. So that's what SB2 is. And then please enter questions you have into the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. But the meat of today's topic is to learn from the first 3 facilities that have successfully certified in SB2 throughout California. And there's 3 different counties, facilities that have certified. So as you probably well know, when it comes to things like energy programs or recycling opportunities, it's very localized. So we've been able to show 3 different regions of the state that have successfully found good recycling options, found good energy partners and efficiency programs, and been able to act on them. For each of the facilities that has been certified, they've had some starting efforts in place around waste reduction and energy conservation. So they weren't starting from scratch. We've had some other companies that have started since then that are starting from scratch. All of that's fine. But for the 3 that have successfully certified, they essentially used the SP2 training that we provided and the different templates to shape those existing efforts into a system, so that it's not just a collection of efforts, but rather a continuous improvement system. And should have mentioned earlier, my background's actually with Toyota, so lean production and that sort of continuous improvement cycle is what I was raised on, so to speak. So I've really seen how powerful it can be to have that continuous improvement cycle and to make small improvements, but to do it consistently. Within these 3 certifications, we found some common themes, as well as some novel approaches that we thought would be helpful to share. So the rest of this is really looking at what has been common to a lot of those, and how can we extract some lessons from these 3 certifications to help everybody else who's working on their certification or is considering certification. Our very first certification was Pleasant Mattress, and they're located in Fresno, California. They were able to set up their SV2 system in 4 months, and they really involved leadership. They involved their quality team as well as their safety team, and then reached out to operations. So they really had an all hands on deck approach, and just did a great job and moved very quickly. And one of the reasons they were able to move so quickly is that they used existing meetings, existing processes that they already had in place for quality and safety. So they weren't creating things from scratch, and that really helped them move fast. The benefits of their program at Pleasant was that they were able to achieve a 77% 3R rate. So they reduced, reused, or recycled 77% of their materials. And this allowed them to only send 1.25 pounds of waste to landfill for every mattress or foundation that they produced. So a really impressive achievement there. And then it also helped their productivity. So they were able to save over $100,000 a year in both avoided landfill expenses as well as recycling revenues, and get some real benefits. On the energy and carbon reduction side, they were able to implement some energy saving practices as well as some equipment upgrades, and reduce their energy consumption per unit produced by 30%. And when we did the carbon calculations to figure out what that equated to, it's the same as driving an average passenger vehicle, 86,000 miles. So some real benefits for climate change and reducing those impacts. And then on the ledger line, they were able to save over $40,000 a year because of that reduced energy expenses. So you can see some real benefits for the environment, some real benefits for the bottom line. And the thing that isn't shown here is they also had some real benefits with employee engagement. This is something that people could rally behind and really get involved in and get excited about. If you want to learn more about the Pleasant Mattress case study, which is the only case study we've completed so far, you can download it from the SP2 website on the Mattress Recycling Council website. So the address is up there. Kate, if you could paste it in the chat, I think that would help as well. So when we looked at the 3 certified facilities, the other 2 have asked to remain anonymous for the time being. So not going into great detail on them. But when we looked across all 3 of those certifications, there have been 7 lessons that I've seen that have been common to several of them, or that really help them go fast and make big gains. So these are the 7. I'm going to go into detail on each one and try to give you some useful tools that you can take away and implement at your own facility. The first, and I mentioned this with Pleasant's ability to move so quickly, is that it's far better to add to existing efforts than to create something new and separate for sustainability. So the different groups that have been good partners for the SB2 program at these 3 different facilities are safety, quality, and productivity. So if you have a productivity or continuous improvement process, they're good partners. Safety tends to have monthly meetings, walkthroughs, training already in place. Same with quality, where you can bring that mindset of continuous improvement of measure and improve and measure again. So those have been great partners to add energy, water, waste to those existing efforts. And when I was at Toyota, we kind of looked at wasted materials, wasted energy, wasted water as a type of quality defect or an eco-waste, eco-muda, we would call it. And some concrete examples is, for instance, one facility, or actually all 3 facilities, already were having monthly meetings for their safety team. So they took their safety team monthly meeting minutes in their minutes structure, and they added waste, energy, and water to it, and added the different elements of what they needed to look at monthly, how they were doing on their metrics, what their walkthrough found when they did a walkthrough, those sorts of things. Walkthrough is another example where they were already doing a walkthrough for safety purposes to make sure their facility was safe. And so long as they were pacing the floor, they added checking recycling bins and checking equipment shutdown to make sure that it was properly powered down at the end of shift, things like that. And then once you have those existing efforts and you've added to them, to then build them into that SB2 framework of check and recheck. For some facilities that are part of a larger corporate structure, so some of the participants have been part of a national manufacturing company, so they were able to look to their corporate for guidance and get things like environmental policy and best practice sharing in place that were already essentially established for them, and they were able to shortcut it that way. Result of all this is that participants found that they were able to do this all with internal staff time. They didn't have to go hire external consultants or buy new software systems or anything like that. And it took them less time than they anticipated. So about 36 hours of staff time to get things up and running, and to and you can see the benefit of adding to those existing efforts. So the second big lesson that made programs particularly successful is once you have all of these 11 elements in place, one way you can look at it is just to say, well, here's 11 things we have to do. But it's much more effective if you can look at it as a system, and then in particular, make the system work for you. And one of the big benefits that was communicated to me during the certification audit is that it allowed them to get things off their mind. So if they saw something that needed to be fixed, they just added it to their corrective and preventive actions list, and they knew it would be looked at in the next meeting. And now they didn't have to carry it around in their memory because they could trust their system. So they were saying that at first they thought it was going to be extra work, that they would have to work for the system. But then when they started to see it as a system, as a framework that was helpful, that it actually helped them do their job better. The general approach for the system is to write down whatever you think should be happening, check to see if it's happening, and then make it better. And a good example of this is several facilities had some practices in place for startup and shut down at the beginning and end of shift. And they weren't written down, they weren't codified, they just kind of knew. And if somebody was out that day who knew, maybe it didn't happen. And none of it was a safety issue, but in terms of energy conservation or making sure recycling bins were in the right places and properly labeled and facing the right direction, those sorts of things weren't always happening consistently before they had a system. By writing it down, having a checklist, they were able to, one, do it more consistently, but also now they had something that they could change and improve on by looking at the list, adding to it, and making it a living tool. And then the last part of operating your system as a system is to make sure that employee communication is two-way. So the first part of that is employees talking to the SB2 team and making sure employees can raise ideas or raise challenges or raise problems. And then the second part is for the SB2 team to communicate back to the employees things like, hey, you told us this idea, here's how we acted on it, and here's the result. Thank you. Hey, everybody, let's give this employee a round of applause for helping. Another big part of that is to communicate progress and targets. And so to say, hey, our goal at the end of the year is to get to 70% recycling. We're currently at 62%. And thanks to all your efforts, or we started the year at 62%, and thanks for all of your efforts for this first quarter, we were able to raise that to 64%. So we still have some ways to go, but here's the progress we've seen. And looking at that loop of employee talking to the team talking to the employees has been a real game changer for some of these facilities. A good example of this is in the corrective and preventive actions. So if we start in the center here and we think about the to-do list, corrective and preventive actions, where you're doing things like assigning, here's a to-do item, who's responsible, what's the immediate corrective action to fix it, what's the root cause of why that happened, and how can we do a long-term preventive action. So that's your list, and then you check it for completion. When you start to think of it as a system, you're saying, well, where are things coming that are added to the list? Well, when you do your program verification walkthrough, you might find some things. If you can't fix it within 2 minutes, add it to the list. Stop thinking about it. Worry about it later when you're going to chug through these or assign it to somebody else. When employees raise concerns or ideas, you can add it to the list. When you have a program resilience incident, your recycler goes out of business and you have to go find another one, well, add it to the list as a corrective action to take. Or if you're doing your measurement against your targets and you find your targets go in the wrong direction, add it to the list. And now it's all in one place, ready for you to work on. But then the other key thing is when you need to take action on these, you have your system in place to help you. So you might need to change your work process or change equipment. But one really good example of this I saw during a certification audit is they did their program verification and they did their walkthrough, and they found that the recycling bins were in the wrong location. They were getting moved for internal reasons. When they were trying to come up with preventive actions, they said, well, let's add to our verification checklist the daily check to make sure that those bins aren't walking. And then while we work on the root cause analysis of why they're moving, or that also led to later, they went and updated their recycling training to make sure that people understood the importance of the bins and their labels and the way the labels are facing. So because they have the system in place, correcting them becomes a lot easier because you have some ready scaffolding to hang your solutions on. So just an example of working your system as a system. The third big takeaway was really to keep it simple and sustain it, kind of a different KISS principle. And throughout all of this, you don't need fancy software. You didn't, the sites that were able to get done were using existing spreadsheets or, in some cases, just a clipboard and a pencil. And they would print out their checklist and just walk the floor and take notes. So like by keeping it simple, they kept it flexible. And in particular, you want to keep your checklist, using quotes, in pencil, meaning that you want to be able to change it and update it and improve it very rapidly. Now, all the sites that I worked with had their checklists in a Word document that they would print each month. But because they were printing it each month rather than, say, printing a stack of them at the beginning of the year, they were able to improve it each month before the next one was printed. So it's just that pencil mentality of saying, hey, this is not written in stone. This is something that we can use as a tool for improvement. Another part of simplicity is for the 3 sites, while the program is focused on waste, energy, and water, none of the sites used much water. They didn't have any industrial water or processed water. They were using water for toilet flushing and washing hands, maybe a little irrigation, but most sites didn't even have that. If that's the case, don't focus on water, focus on waste, focus on energy, and focus where your impact is. And just shows the importance of doing that facility impact assessment to say, where are we impacting the environment? Where is the environment impacting our bottom line? And where should we focus first? And then the last part of simplicity is that, particularly in training, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Pictures are inherently multilingual if that's helpful for your employees. And then as you're going through your monthly walkthroughs and seeing if things are working, taking pictures, one, can make corrective action much easier because you can hand it off to somebody else and they can see what you saw. But also you now have this big stock of materials that you can use to improve training at the end of the year before you do your next annual training. So those were just really simple things that these sites were doing. And when I say take pictures, it was literally just somebody pulling out their cell phone, snapping a quick pic, and then using it in several ways to improve their program. Here are 2 examples of using those visuals in training. So when people see that we're talking about scrap metal, they can look at the picture and say, oh, yeah, so these are the 3 types of scrap metal that I handle in my job. Now I know what you're talking about. Or from a different facility, had pictures within their facility of the specific materials, had them labeled, and just kept things very visual. So it was a very helpful tool and very effective in their training. The next big lesson learned was don't do it all at once. So in the process of developing their facility impact assessment, part of that is to say, where do we see opportunities for improvement? And just to brainstorm that across the entire facility. But the goal is not to do everything right now, because you want to focus where the priorities are, where you can get your biggest gains for the effort that you have available. And so the recommendation is that once you have your facility impact assessment, use that to set targets. And then once you have those targets, pick at least 3 improvement projects that you can do that year to support each target. So for instance, all of the facilities had at least 1 waste reduction target and had an energy reduction target. So they planned 3 improvement projects for the waste and 3 for the energy. And the good part about having at least 3, well, I take that back. 1 facility had like 8 because their way of doing things was to have a whole bunch of 8 mini projects. That was just the way they normally did all of their quality improvements. So they just continued doing it that way. But for all the others, 3 projects throughout the year. And that way, if one of the projects just doesn't pan out, you try something, it doesn't work, that's okay, you have 2 others. And within those, within the SP2 certification process, the requirement is to have a system in place for continuous improvement. The requirement is not that everything you try succeeds. So you kind of know that you're being innovative and pushing the boundaries when stuff doesn't succeed. So that's okay. It's not going to disqualify you from getting certified. And then the last part there is just to leverage however you improve other things at the facility and then apply that to waste reduction, energy, and water. So if you have Kaizen events, do Kaizen events. If you have rapid scrums or whatever technique you use, or if you have a continuous improvement engineer who visits your site, or however you do it, just do that for waste, energy, and water. And then I would add, in addition to that, make sure that you're asking employees who actually have their hands on the work for ideas as well. So just a good way of engaging brains and getting more eyeballs on the problem. The next one, and this was very interesting when we started looking at the financial benefits, is that recycling is nice and it's good to have a high recycling rate, but a lot of the real cost benefits, and if you're familiar with life cycle assessment, a lot of the real environmental benefits come from actually reducing and reusing the waste rather than recycling it. So now, a lot of times that involves working with suppliers or equipment manufacturers, so it can be a little more involved. But in fact, all of the facilities had some reuse efforts that were already in place, but they weren't actually tracking the impact. So some examples over here on the right, like one of the facilities was actually repairing their own pallets rather than scrapping them, but they weren't measuring how much weight of pallet they were preserving or reusing a second time. Or another facility was using blocking and bracing lumber from incoming shipments, and then whenever they would ship out, rather than buying new, they were moving it across their facility from the receiving dock to the shipping dock, inspecting it for nails and safety hazards, and then reusing it. So those sorts of things, they were doing it, they just weren't measuring it. So they started tracking it, and they were really surprised at just how much of an impact they were having. And then once you have those in place, and actually let's stay on the right for a second here, on the waste reduction side, some really good programs that did involve working with suppliers and manufacturers were like looking at when the when the quilting machine transitions from one set of materials and patterns to the next, there's a section that has to be cut out, the transition. And so they applied their quality know-how to reducing that transition. So before it was just however long it needed to be, and it might be 16 inches, it might be 8, but by careful planning, they were able to get it down to a consistent 8 every time. And at the end of the week, they'd really saved a lot of material that never had to be recycled to begin with. And that saved a lot of costs, saved a lot of time, and saved a lot of environmental impact. Packing machine recalibration was another highly successful practice, because when they would package the mattress at the end of the line, there were a lot of offcuts from the poly bag that would go around the mattress. And that offcuts, at first they just thought that it was just a fact of life, and they were recycling it, and they figured, well, at least we're recycling it. But by working with the equipment manufacturer, they were able to really calibrate the machine to not have any offcuts and eliminate the waste rather than just recycling it. So some really good examples there of rethinking things that, even if you're recycling it, even better to not make it to begin with. And then the last part of this, last two parts, were when you go to measure what was traditionally a recycling rate, to be sure to include that reduce and reuse, and to measure a 3R rate to get a big picture. Because otherwise what they were finding is when you reduce waste that you used to recycle, your recycling rate actually goes down because you're not diluting the landfill waste anymore as much as you used to. So being sure to measure, or at least estimate and include, the reduce and reuse becomes very important, so that your metric continues to show progress and that you're heading in the right direction by doing the right thing. And then the last part is, after you've done these improvements, you've reduced waste, you've added additional reuses of those materials within your facility, to then go back and look at your disposal containers and do a right sizing evaluation. So if you have 4-yard containers that are picked up 5 days a week, and you just removed a lot of waste from them, what some of the facilities found is that 5 days a week, they were emptying air from their site and hauling away air, and the container was only, a quarter to half full. So going back and saying, let's try only 3 days a week pickup. Let's try 2 days a week. Maybe we only need a 3-yard container instead of a 4-yard container. And that led to a lot of savings, by not having that same service level and expense from their landfill collection. So several ways to save money there. The next piece, and we will be looking at Q&A at the end, so we're just saving all that for the end. So please enter your questions as we go along. The other piece was that energy conservation can also be a big source of savings. And in particular, if a facility is using compressed air, that really compressed air is just hidden electricity. So having a regular repeated process of identifying compressed air leaks, either through some sites did a periodic review that the maintenance team did, where once a week after close of shift, they would go through and detect leaks. Or another site just really used it as an employee engagement effort to really jumpstart employees getting used to raising ideas for reducing waste and saving energy, and just saying, hey, if you hear a hiss, let us know, because that's wasted electricity. And so both of those were very effective and just kind of got people used to thinking about compressed air as something that is wasted, and that has a real environmental impact. The other thing that all three sites did was to work with their electrical provider to do energy efficiency upgrades. All of them had local incentive programs for doing things like upgrading their lighting to LEDs, upgrading their air compressor to a more efficient motor, or adding timers was another popular thing for things like hot glue pots or forklift chargers, compressor shutdown over a weekend, to make sure that all these things were automatically shut off, automatically started up when they needed to be, and that it didn't rely on somebody going through and manually doing it, and that person not being out sick or them not having a backup, those sorts of things. And they were anticipating getting savings on a per kilowatt hour basis. What they were not anticipating is how much they saved on demand charges. So if you're not familiar, electrical rates have both a per energy use per kilowatt hour charge, but then also you have a charge based on the 15-minute time slot with the most demand throughout the day. And particularly through clever use of timers, they were able to reduce the total or the highest amount of demand that they ever reached throughout the day. So for instance, moving forklift charging from the middle of the day when everything else was going on to the end of the day, they were able to shift that demand into a period that didn't have a lot of demand. And essentially, instead of their demand being very spiky, it was much a smoother curve. And that was actually a bigger source of cost savings by reducing their demand charges. So that was a big surprise that they weren't anticipating, but of course we're pleasantly surprised with. And then the last one is to make sure you have a backup plan. So you establish your SB2 team, you have your SB2 team lead, and then to ask the question of who's going to do whatever activity if the lead is out, or the person who normally does the walkthroughs is out, or the person who reviews the corrective or preventive actions is out. Or what if the SB2 team lead gets promoted and moves into another position, gets other responsibilities, and has to transition to somebody else, or if they leave the site entirely and either move to another site within the same company or change companies. And making sure that you have that backup plan in place before that transition occurs means that you'll have a much more smooth transition. And then making sure that whatever you're doing, particularly how you track data, is written into a standard operating procedure and kind of a how-to guide. Then that can make sure that when whoever is tracking it leaves, whoever picks it up from them, or even if they don't leave, what if they're out sick that day? Whoever picks up the responsibility from them can do it consistently, can track the exact same number in the exact same way, and make sure that you're comparing apples to apples throughout the whole year. So the sites that had the easiest time with these transitions intentionally created what they called grab and go tools. So if you need somebody to go do your periodic walkthrough, trying to make that walkthrough checklist as self-explanatory as possible, not using jargon that only a few people understand, speaking the local lingo of what people call different departments and different workstations, to where anybody could grab that clipboard, walk through, make some observations, and get the walkthrough done. So making those tools grab and go gave them the maximum flexibility. So when they did have to do a transition, bring somebody new on the team, somebody leaves the team, they were able to do that much more successfully because they had set themselves up for transition. So those are the 7 lessons learned from these 3 successfully certified facilities. So now just wanted to turn it over to you all and see what sorts of questions you have. And Kate's going to be going through those questions and queuing them up.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, it's great to hear how much SB2 has helped facilities look through their process through a different lens, and I've really found it to be valuable.
Well, so. And a lot of just kind of building on that, what a lot of them had told me during the certification is that no one part of it was complicated. And no one part of it was something that they probably shouldn't have already been doing anyway, just because they got benefit from it. But having a roadmap and a template to start working from just made it easy and allowed them to get over the hump of getting around to doing it. So they found SB2 useful as a roadmap for getting it done to where they could actually find time for it.
Great. Well, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Kate Caddy. I'm the Sustainability Manager at MRC. So I do work with Ryan on the SP2 program. And I'm about to get into some of your questions. So we had a few questions, Ryan, about the developing the SP2 team and what that process looks like, and specifically what type of expertise you're looking for in that team.
Yeah, so within the facilities that have certified, I think the key thing that has made them successful is they've had a diverse team that were able to have eyeballs on all aspects of the facility. So the teams ranged in size from 4 to 8, and they involved safety usually, because safety was walking the floor, knew the facility, knew also what they had to manage in terms of safety. They had people from production who had their hands on the work. And sometimes those supervisors, sometimes those frontline folks, people from maintenance doing both facility maintenance and equipment maintenance. And then also people from supply chain management, procurement, who had the contacts to be able to reach out to suppliers and say, hey, here's something you're sending us, some packaging that isn't recyclable. What can we do to find something different? And then the other key piece has been, and there are different styles of doing this, is some level of senior management engagement. One facility had the president of the plant on the SP2 team saying, what can we do to get this done faster? So like that was, I'd say, a very high level of engagement. Other facilities had senior managers, like the facility manager over the whole place, checking in monthly and saying, how are we doing against our targets? And just that level of interest and that level of follow-up showed to everybody that this is a priority. So having that diversity of perspectives and skills on the SP2 team really set them up for success.
Great. Let's see. What are some of the examples of projects that you would recommend or that they could start with?
So, one of the things that was super helpful is to have a recycling bin audit. And like one of the facilities, like that was where they started. They said, our target is to improve our recycling rate. And the first project we're going to do that is to say, and they just printed out a map of their facility and they said, where do we have recycling bins? Are the recycling bins clearly labeled? Are the labels facing where our employees are? are they consistent? So does green always mean wood, and does blue always mean plastic? Or do you have some places where those are swapped and add additional confusion? And then once they have their map, they just added that to their walkthrough, and they would walk through the facility and say, okay, so this bin that was for paper that we had set next to the printer for shipping, it's moved 3 times in a row. Now we need to figure out, why does this bin keep getting dragged to another location? They added it to their corrective and preventive list, and it gave them a framework for saying, this is what good looks like. Now let's go through and see if we're doing that. The other big thing that they learned is that they had some locations where they had a recycling bin, but there wasn't a trash can for like 50 feet. And they found there was a lot of trash in the recycling bin because it was the only thing available. So that was another case where once they looked at it on a map, it was kind of obvious that what they should do, but it just gave them a chance to say, here's what the ideal state is, and here's how we're going to do it. And a lot, they had to buy, like, I think 3 new bins, but most of it was just rearranging what they already had, and then replacing labels if the labels had come off, or in some cases limiting lids with slots in them so that they would have a place to put a label. So that was a good one. And then the other one that, again, super simple but super effective, is to have that startup and shutdown procedure for energy conservation. And to say, at the beginning of shift, here's what we go through and turn on. At the end of shift, here's what we go through and turn off. At the end of the week, before the weekend, presuming you don't have shifts over the weekend, here's what we're going to go on and do, kind of a deep turn off. And they didn't have to go and buy anything new. They didn't have to, rearrange any wiring. They just had to turn things off, and they found some really big benefits from that. And then that became information for them to work with when they did reach out to their electricity provider and look at the incentives and say, oh, so we can actually get a discount on timers to do this all manually, but they had a list to work from to have a productive conversation. So those were 2 things where they were super simple, just requires a clipboard and a blank sheet of paper, but they were able to get really big benefits and really set a foundation for the rest of their program and the rest of their future efforts.
I always find it amazing how bin placement, how effective that is if it's done right.
Yeah, well, and what they found was that in as much as they could make the location of the bins, the size of the bins, support the work process rather than create extra work, then they were able to actually, trim time off of their production time, like actually make things faster. And a good example of this is they had a section where they had to peel off a label and the sticker back, the label back. The recycling bin for it was a large bin that was kind of across the workstation. The worker would always have to go over and put it, and then take 12 steps to get back to the assembly line where they were working. And their SB2 team came through with their quality person and said, hey, if we get a smaller recycling bin and we put it under the conveyor, will that save you steps? And the worker was like, yeah, of course. And so they were able to save steps, reduce their time, just by getting the right size bin in the right location. So it was great to see productivity gains, strain reduction from an ergonomics perspective, less turning around and twisting. So it was a really great example of a win-win that was, at the end of the day, super simple, but required looking at things through a different lens, having a different set of goggles on to say, let's put on our recycling goggles and say, how can we make this better?
That's great. This one I feel like we could do a whole webinar on. How do you measure waste reduction and reuse?
Yeah, no, we really could. The key is in getting everything to a per unit measurement or estimate. So the site that was doing the pallet repair, they were saying, well, we know that pallets have different sizes and have different weights based on the wood that was used, and we don't have a scale nearby where we can measure every single pallet. And we're like, you know what? That's fine. So get 5 random pallets, weigh them all, get the average, and then just keep a little tick mark. So every time you repair a pallet, make a tick. At the end of the month, count up your ticks, multiply it by your average weight, and that's going to be better than having no data at all. And it's going to recognize the effort of the person doing the pallet repair and the importance of having that program. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but what it does need to be is consistent, and you need to have a reason for it and be able to back that up so that when we come out and do the audit, we're saying, show us objective evidence of how you're doing this. And if you can pull out that piece of paper and say, we weighed 5, here's the average, here's how we do the calculation, you're golden. That's great. It does not need to be complicated. But getting it to a per unit as opposed to a per year or time period is the key thing. Because now you have something to multiply and to adapt to when production volume goes up next month and goes down the following month.
Okay. This one's sort of along the same lines. Same topic. What if we partner with a supplier to meet a waste reduction goal, but fall short of that goal? What does that mean for our certification?
It does not disqualify you from certification. So when you set a target or a improvement project, like working with a supplier. So just to give some concrete examples, you set a target to reach, to reduce your waste landfilled down to 3 pounds per unit produced. And as one of the projects for that, you say, okay, we're going to work with the supplier to reduce packaging, or to, let's say reduce packaging for this material that's generating a lot of our landfill waste. You start talking with the supplier, you try it out, you find your damage rate goes up. You actually are damaging the raw material that you need to make your mattress, and then having to scrap it. So that attempt didn't work. So you go back to your original package and say, we'll try again next time. What you're doing, and the certification is based on continuous improvement. And what you can demonstrate during the audit is that you have made efforts toward continuous improvement. You've learned some things, you've tried things, you haven't ignored it, and you've learned what doesn't work. And now you're the wiser for trying again in the future. Making sure where it would be a problem is if you set a target and say, hey, we're going to try to get down to 3 pounds per unit produced, and then you basically ignore the target for a year and just kind of hope it comes true. That would disqualify you from certification, because you were not able to show effort towards continuous improvement. You weren't able to show how you'd set projects and how you had measured the outcomes and those sorts of things. So merely failing at a project or even a target does not qualify you, as long as you can show effort and improvement and learning along the way.
Well said. I think this is the best for last. We have a couple more minutes. How did Pleasant Mattress save $100,000 per year in waste expenses?
Yeah, it's a big number. And when we first did that calculation, when we were working on that case study, we all kind of looked at it and was like, nah, that can't be true. Hold on, we must have like added an extra 0 in there or moved a decimal place. And so we went back and checked and rechecked our numbers. But what we found was there were 2 sources of the savings. One was once we found out, one was avoiding landfill. So they were sending waste to landfill. Saying waste to landfill is expensive, at least in California it is. And every ton that they recycled, they didn't have to pay for pickup, transportation, and disposal at landfill. So that was savings category 1. The second was when they did actually receive a check back from their recycler, and then cash that, add it to their SB2 fund. And what they found was that not all of their recycling resulted in a check coming back. Sometimes it was just break even, because like the value of the materials covered the transportation of the material of the pickup. However, even if it was 0, that's still better than losing $40 a ton through landfill costs. So they were able to add together the avoided landfill expense, what it would have been in an all landfill situation, and then add the recycling revenue, like all the checks they got back, together. And together it was $100,000. So it was something they'd never done that calculation before, and it really surprised them. But at the end of the day, they're now able to offer their high quality mattress at a better price point because they have a more productive facility as a whole.
It's a profound number. And as you said, it's really looking through your existing process already and building SP2 within that can have that level of impact.
Yep. Making it systematic, making it consistent, doing it the right way every time, or at least not every time, but more consistently than you used to. And when you didn't do it consistently, finding out and then making yourself a better tool for doing it better next time.
Yeah. Okay, Ryan, that's all we have for questions. Some were answered in the chat. Thank you, Tom, for taking that on. Any final thoughts before we conclude?
I would just say that the comment that we got back at the end of certification was that a lot of folks, when they first started the process, they found it intimidating because they thought that, 11 things, that's a lot. And it just sounds like so much. I don't know if I have the time, but they found that when they started working through them one at a time, that no one piece of it was complicated. It was just a matter of stringing them all together, working on one at a time, standing it up, getting it going, and then moving on to the next one. And so when they had kind of looked at all 11 at once, that it was intimidating, but once they started working on it, that it was actually kind of one of the SP2 team leads says, it's really just common sense, but it's nice to have a checklist of things of common sense things I need to put in place. So thank you. So it was great to get that feedback, because that was our goal in setting it up, is that it's not rocket surgery. Like, none of this is particularly complicated, but it's a matter of doing it all.
Yeah, and we do provide the training, the customized training. As Ryan said, we have a website, a participant site that has a ton of tools and guidance documents that go through each individual requirement in detail, provides examples, does a gap analysis at the end. So we're also not asking anyone to start from nothing with nothing. So there's a lot of resources available. So if anyone's interested, please contact Ryan. I think your contact information was provided at the beginning.
There you go.
There you go, right on cue. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We'd love to talk to you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.